We got some rain here the other day, and I really enjoyed the drive home. Because it rains so rarely in Los Angeles, when it does happen, it feels like an event. In fact, it feels like an entirely different city. In the car, I had a package that was delivered to work, and I was really excited to come home and open it up. And it was this. It's an elliptical glass cloche. So most of these bell jars are round on the bottom, but this is an oval. And this way you can have a nice little scene going on in this cloche. I became obsessed with them when I visited the John Soane Museum in London. So John Soane was a prominent architect, and he had a love for antiquities. His house was filled with them and so much art. But what really caught my eye were these little models of classical ruins, and they were all in these elliptical glass cloches. I realized then that I needed that in my life. So I found a maker on Etsy based in the Ukraine called Microtecture, and they make these models of classical ruins. They're so precise, so beautiful, and they're made out of cork. That's the same material that the models in John Soane's house were made of, and painted in gypsum to just get that perfect look of weathered marble. The first model I bought was this Arch of Hadrian, and it's on my mantelpiece right now. I love to just sit and look at this thing. Ideally, I would find a cloche for it, but it's pretty wide, so I don't think that's going to be possible, but I'm always on the lookout. The next piece I got from Microtecture was this Corinthian column. And I found the most perfect cloche for it. I was in France last autumn in a very small town, and I popped into a brocante and I saw it. It was absolutely perfect. The seller said it was 19th century. Now, I had been looking on eBay for a long time for something just like this. The quality is so perfect, the glass is so clear, you don't see any seams. But on eBay, these are very expensive. I can't find anything for less than $1,000. And I got this at the brocante for, I think, 70 euros. Incredible. So I filled it with t-shirts and soft clothes, and I hand carried it home on the airplane. At the airport security, they kept asking me, "What is this?" And I kept saying, "C'est une cloche de verre, c'est une décoration pour la maison." And they're like, "Well, unwrap it. It looks weird." So thankfully, I was able to bring it back to the United States, and it didn't break, which was a miracle. I put the column in the cloche. It fits so perfectly, but I wanted to create a scenario, so I also put a crystal next to it, and this wooden hand that I picked up from IKEA. It needed something more, so I had this old necklace with a glass strawberry pendant. I got this at the Huntington Gardens gift shop, and I love it, but I don't wear it very often, so I thought it'd be more interesting in this display, and it really is. I love the way the strawberry catches the light. I don't think John Soane would approve of this composition, but hey, I gotta live my life. So a few weeks ago, I found this cloche and it was on sale. So I snapped it up and it arrived a few days ago. Compared to the one I got in France, it's a little bit more rustic, let's say. You can see a seam, it's thicker glass, which is probably good, it's sturdier. So the big question that was facing me was, what am I going to put in this thing? When I bought it online, I didn't have any ideas because I just needed to see it, get a sense of the scale, and then I would know what would go in it. Actually, it came together so quickly. This is a model of the Sphinx of Naxos. Originally, this Sphinx was on the top of a very tall column by the Temple of Apollo in Delphi, Greece. And it's carved from marble from Naxos, an island in the Aegean. I found this little model at an antique store in Pasadena, and I really love it. It even has a little label on it, which makes me think it was used for educational purposes, and maybe it was in a museum. I just had it sitting around my house for a little while. So I put it in the glass cloche and it looked amazing, but it needed something more. So I had a little bit of this burgundy red velvet left over from Christmas. So I draped it over this box of incense actually, and it's the perfect height, and the burgundy just brings out the Sphinx even more. So obviously the fragrance that comes to mind with this whole exercise is Naxos from Xerjoff. I think this fragrance might be the brand's top seller. I'm not sure, but I know it's incredibly popular. And I do love it. For me, the main notes of this fragrance are lavender, honey, and tobacco. There's something about that texture of lavender that I find so beautiful. Now, some people think of lavender as a floral note. I don't at all. I have lavender in my garden, and they're long, stiff stalks like rosemary. I think of lavender more like rosemary or sage. It's definitely an herb. And the smell of it is actually a little bit medicinal. But the scent profile contains linalool, and so does bergamot. So there's actually a little bit of a crossover between those two scent profiles. I find that really interesting. The lavender of this fragrance really puts it into the fougere category. But it has so much depth. And like I said, this fragrance is all about texture to me. I can actually imagine honey dripping from a stalk of lavender. And I love that. It's a very chic, refined, dreamy fragrance. Now, a long time ago, when I was a sculptor based in London, I had someone come into my studio while I was working. And in the studio, I had books all over the place of classical statues. I got a lot of inspiration from them. I was very inspired by the gestures and the poses of these statues, and I tried to work them into my own sculptures. So I was working along, and this guest was kind of nosing around the studio, and he asked, "Steve, are you a Hellenist?" And that question really threw me by surprise. I didn't really know how to answer it. So I was like, no, I just like looking at these pictures because I get some inspiration for my sculptures. And that was that. Now, when I think back to that question, that was decades ago, and I realize I still have this weird fascination with models of Greek ruins and the Sphinx of Naxos. I think I might be a Hellenist. While I was researching the Sphinx and the Temple of Apollo, I was reading how highly esteemed people, like top athletes, were awarded by having a laurel wreath placed on their head. This wreath is called a Stephanos. And I thought, I can make a Stephanos. I have a laurel tree right next to my house. In fact, it really needs cutting back because some of the branches were growing into the electrical wires. And that's not good. So I took this as my motivation to finally trim this tree. And I had all of these long branches of laurel. Now, you would have thought after the rain that we got in Los Angeles that the leaves would be nice and clean, but they're not. They were covered in LA grime, so I had to give them a nice rinse with the hose. And then when they were dry, I brought them inside and I made a wreath. So I feel it's important, now that I'm talking about Laurel, to mention this fragrance from Comme des Garçons in collaboration with Monocle. It's called Laurel. By the way, laurel is the same as bay leaves, for example, or laurel leaves. This is the fragrance that came out after Hinoki, which is a huge success. But I've always loved Laurel too. It's a little bit of a sleeper. It's so incredibly aromatic, and you get those beautiful spicy notes like crushed black pepper and maybe some clove. In fact, the old school bay rum that you might use as an astringent or an aftershave contains bay or laurel, and it smells incredibly clove-like. I think laurel on one wrist and Naxos on the other wrist are a perfect combination. Now, when I was a kid, I remember going to the supermarket with my mom, and by the checkout, they had all these magazines and books, and I picked up one of the books, and it was all about the origin of popular names. So I looked up Stephen, and it said the crowned one. It didn't say anything more. So I suppose all of my life, I kind of knew that my name made reference to a crown or a wreath, but it wasn't until just now when I started researching the Temple of Apollo. My name comes from Stephanos. So I'm realizing that it is time to try this on. I think I'm a Hellenist.